We began with the thyroid in the last lecture and stopped just as we were developing the follicles. We said it was made up of follicles. And one way to look at a follicle is to think of a bunch of grapes. All those grapes would be individual follicles. But we're going to cut through them. So these represent follicles. And we'll see that they're lined with epithelium. And so forth. And some say this is cuboidal epithelium. But as we'll see, its dimensions will depend on the functional state. Sometimes it will be higher, sometimes it will be flatter. Now, the follicles are filled with what is called a colloid, which is a gelatinous substance. So the green is colloid. A jelly-like, we could say, consistency. And it contains the storage form of the thyroid hormone. The storage form of the thyroid hormone. What's that called? Thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin. The circulating form of the thyroid hormone is called circulating form of thyroid hormone equals what? T3, triiodothyronine. Triiodothyronine. Now, you can see we have this iodine component in the hormone, so you need iodine in your diet to form the hormone. If you have low iodine, the hormone that is coming from the pituitary, from the anterior pituitary hormone, which is called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, acts on the follicles to produce the thyroid hormone. But if there's not enough iodine to form, the TSH keeps trying, stimulating that follicle, that group of follicles. And what happens? The thyroid enlarges. And we form the condition, what do we call the very, very large thyroid? A goiter. You don't see goiters on people who live close to the sea. They get their products from the sea and rich in iodine. Where would you might see those who don't get this? The foothills of the Himalayas. The women working in the fields there have huge necks with beautiful women. But they didn't even, the public health didn't even get in to get it there. Maybe now, but when I was there, they all had huge goiters. So now if you have an individual, let's ask the question first. What's the purpose of the thyroid hormone? What does it do? It regulates the metabolic rate of all tissues. And it functions in the development of the nervous system. You need the thyroid hormone to develop a healthy nervous system. Helps develop the nervous system. So there are some people who just don't have enough thyroid hormone. If you're a child and you don't have enough thyroid hormone, so hypothyroid, as a child, what do we call the condition? A cretin. Cretin. Severe hypothyroid. This is severe hypothyroid. Hypothyroid. As adult, what is the term that's used? Myxedema. Myxedema. And what are the symptoms? This would be then decreased mental and physical activity. Sometimes children even using a derogatory term for a playmate when they're not too bright. They just call them a cretin. But you recognize there's a reason because of the reduced thyroid activity. So let's see. One other hormone that's coming from the thyroid is calcitonin. What does calcitonin do? It lowers calcium, blood calcium. Lowers blood calcium. So again, that basic introduction to your thyroid gland. Let's move on to our parathyroid. very important gland. The parathormone we've studied. Product. What does it do? It will raise calcium. How does it raise calcium? It acts on what cells? Osteoclasts, right? Which break down the bone. And liberate calcium. Parathormone is essential to life. You can get neuromuscular problems severe without the parathormone. What's the location of your parathyroid glands? Well, para means near thyroid. So we're going to have, remember, the isthmus of the thyroid was over the second to fourth tracheal rings, and then it was bilobed. This is our thyroid gland. This was the isthmus. Review, review, review. And these little parathyroids, there are 4 of them usually, are on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. That's why parathyroid. So in green, we've put in 4 parathyroid glands. Took a long time for them to find those. They would take out thyroids for various reasons, not knowing that adherent on the posterior surface of thyroid were these little glands. All right, let's move on to the next one. Be the adrenal. What's it mean? Add, near, renal, kidney. So we'll see. Whoops, sorry, a little big. Have our kidney. And on the superior pole of the kidney, just like a little hat up here, will be the adrenal gland. There are, of course, 2 of them, 1 on each kidney. And so they're on the superior pole of the kidney. Are they retroperitoneal or are they within the peritoneal cavity? Is the kidney retroperitoneal? So are the adrenals retroperitoneal? Sure. Is the ureter retroperitoneal? Sure. All right. So it's retroperitoneal. Clinically, you'll get stressed with this peritoneal. May seem minor now, but it's not. Now, the adrenal has two components. It has an adrenal medulla and an adrenal cortex. We know the medulla would be inside then. So this is my adrenal medulla. And most of the adrenal is the cortex. So if we look at the adrenal medulla first, it's of neural origin. Quick review, remember our nervous system was forming from a sheet of ectoderm. And then it folded. Forming our neural groove. And upon these neural folds, we had neural crest cells forming. Neural crest. So as the differentiation continues, the neural groove drops down, forms our neural tube, and our neural crest cells are found here between surface ectoderm and our neural tube. What does a neural tube form? The what? And what else? Your whole brain, your whole CNS. Form CNS. And these neural crest cells migrate out. Some of them will form DRGs, but others will form adrenal medulla cells. So the adrenal medulla is coming from neural crest cells. Now these cells which form the adrenal medulla will allow the cells then to form hormones in a category called catecholamines. So adrenal medulla forms catecholamines. And these will include two hormones. Let's give epinephrine. Epinephrine acts like the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system. So example, is it going to speed the heart or slow the heart? Speed the heart, sure. And the other catecholamine is norepi or norepinephrine. And it is, for example, a vasoconstrictor. Constricts the blood vessels. Vasoconstrictor. Now, the majority of the adrenal will be the adrenal cortex. And it will have two main classifications of hormones. We'll have the glucocorticoids and the mineralocorticoids. Glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. What are our glucocorticoids? Cortisol, and hydrocortisone. What are they doing for you? Pardon? I can hear some noises, but I can't hear specifically. They're released during stress, right? They affect every cell in the body. So when you have excess glucocorticoids, they can reduce immune function. Reduce immune function. But they also reduce cerebral cortical structure in excess. Another reason why you've got to learn to monitor your stress. What disease do they take cortisol for? Today, I hear a lot when my students come in. Have you heard of lupus? When the immune system is attacking the body, you want to cut down that immune system activity, you take cortisol. But then again, you see what it's doing to the cerebral cortex. Always choices. We took out the adrenals of rats, and the cerebral cortex grew tremendously. We don't recommend it, but it shows that the cortisols are keeping a dampening on it, and especially when stressed. So we try not to get into stress. Look around at final time. Do we succeed or not? We try to help. Mineralocorticoids, what are they? Mineralocorticoids will be adjusting, regulating water and electrolytes. So number 2 is regulating water and electrolytes. So what's the example of a mineralocorticoid that we've given you already? Aldosterone. Good for you. Example, aldosterone. Where does aldosterone act? Distal convoluted tubule, right. And what's it doing then? Increasing water and sodium. Right, electrolyte. Increases water and electrolytes. And in this case, it will be sodium. All right, so your adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla have very different functions, but they're put together into one single gland. What diseases are there of the adrenal cortex? Addison's disease and Cushing's disease. Addison's disease which will be hypofunction of adrenal cortex. Low blood pressure, frequently pigmented skin, and other symptoms. Just so you're familiar with the terms that they're related to abnormalities of the adrenal cortex. Cushing's disease. How many have heard of Harvey Cushing? Anybody? Different era. He was a great neurosurgeon. Everybody in medicine had heard of him 50 years ago. Cushing's disease is hyperfunction. Of adrenal cortex. And a simple function will be a high blood pressure. High blood pressure plus obesity. So when you learn your endocrine glands, you learn normal function and then abnormal function, either hypo or hyper. Now we go on to the anterior pituitary. How many have had the endocrinology course here? Not many. I was just thinking, endocrinology is the whole semester, and here we try to get this across to you in an hour and a half. So let's look at the pituitary gland. What bone surrounds the pituitary gland? Sphenoid. What do we call the specific area? Sella turcica. Good. All right, so we know its location. Turkey saddle. Now it has two components. We have a neural hypophysis and we have an adenohypophysis. The neural hypophysis is the posterior pituitary. And the adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary. What does hypophysis mean? First thing they learned about the pituitary, if they took it out, the animal stopped growing. It means to grow. In fact, the first work was done in Argentina. They took it out, but they encroached on the hypothalamus. You have your ventral medial nucleus of the hypothalamus. When you injure that, you get a fat rat. So as I said, the effect of taking out the pituitary is obesity. And then they realized mistakes. So you watch over history the refining of technology to find out the true function of an area. So the neural hypophysis, posterior pituitary, obviously has neural origin. It's coming from the floor of the diencephalon. The adenohypophysis is coming from what's called the stomodeum, or we're just going to call it the roof of the mouth in the embryo. So very different origin. We'll just say roof of mouth. So what do we know about our neural hypophysis? The posterior pituitary. Hormones. We have two. One we've talked about it just recently. The antidiuretic hormone. Where's the antidiuretic hormone acting? Collecting duct. Good for you. What do we call the condition when we don't have antidiuretic hormone? Water's passing through. What did we say it was? Diabetes insipidus. Good for you. All right, then the other hormone coming from the posterior pituitary, what's it called? Oxytocin? Where does oxytocin act? In the female, during birth, oxytocin acts on the uterus. To induce contractions for birthing. How many of you have watched a birth? A few. Mm-hmm. Did you find that the most thrilling experience in your life so far? Probably. Yes? All right. In the male, why does the male need oxytocin? Oxytocin acts on his vas deferens. We'll study the male reproductive system like we'll study the female soon, but I'm just going to put it in here to complete. It acts on the smooth muscle of the vas deferens. So it gives strong contractions during ejaculation. sperm. E, Jack, U, lation. All right. Where are these two hormones produced? Are they produced in the posterior pituitary? No. Where are they produced? They're produced in the hypothalamus. They're just stored in the pituitary. Produced in the hypothalamus, stored in pituitary. All right, then, let's look at the anterior pituitary. And we will look at 5 hormones here. Just a word about each. And they're given names with regard to the hormone that they're dealing with. So the first one will be the somatotrophs. And 50% of the cells in the anterior pituitary deal with somatotrophs. And of somatotrophs, growth hormone, making the news a great deal lately. People have discovered it. Would you take growth hormone? Interesting to ask these questions and why or why not. Then we have corticotrophs. They make up about 20% of the cells. This is percent of cells in the anterior pit. Now, the corticotroph that's most used is ACTH. Have you heard of ACTH? ACTH, coming from the anterior pituitary. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Adrenocorticotrophic hormone. So where does ACTH act? So what's one hormone that it would liberate? Cortisol, aldosterone. We just listed them. Then we have gonadotrophs. And they account for about 5%. What will these gonadotrophs be? Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone. FSH equals follicle stimulating hormone. So what it's going to be acting on? The follicles of the ovary, sure. What hormone will be released? Estrogen. Somebody's had this. It's not the follicle itself. We'll see when we study the female reproductive system, but it's a tissue on the outside of the follicle. Then the LH is luteinizing. Let's do that differently. Hit that with that. Luteinizing hormone. So from its name, what's it acting on? Corpus luteum. Corpus luteum. And what hormone does the corpus luteum produce? Progesterone. But this is all in the female. What is follicle-stimulating hormone doing for the male? I want to take this off and I'll continue with my other two. Sorry. So FSH in male will be acting on the tubules that produce the sperm, the seminiferous tubules. We'll just put tubules right now. Tubules in testis, because we'll have this when we study male reproduction. Acts on tubules in testis to produce sperm. What is luteinizing hormone doing in the male? The testis has cells called interstitial cells. It's acting on interstitial cells in testis. We'll see this with the male when we do the reproductive system. And what do those interstitial cells produce? Testosterone. All right, so much for our gonadotrophs. We have two more. Thyrotrophs. Thyrotrophs. Now, who can put two and two together and tell me what the thyrotroph is? Thyroid stimulating hormone, sure. We just had it. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroid stimulating hormone is going to be producing what? T3, steps-wise. And that's for metabolic rate, right? And nervous system development. Excuse me, that's development down there. And that takes us now, what's the fifth one? Mammotroph. Mammotroph. The mammotroph will be prolactin. Prolactin. Carl Nickel, professor here, worked on prolactin. Big sign, it's the biogenic hormone. Everything is influenced by prolactin. It's amazing how much action it has on our bodies. But primarily, it acts on the mammary gland to secrete milk. Do you have time to enjoy playing with things, memories, when they slide in when you're trying to do something else? I remember when we first went to Harvard, we were playing a word game, and they were acting out things, what do they call it, charades? And they were trying to get, the key thing was tit for tat. And I was such a biologist, you know, just full of all of this coming from Berkeley. And I said, mammary gland. And it just brought down the house. That was so strange to call a tit a mammary gland. But anyhow, that's what slid into my memory. I just have to share with you the fun of having this brain that has, for all those years, that little bit of information that I've never shared with anybody. But anyhow, let's look at some slides. Oh, I should have put mammary glands were 20% and thyrotrophs were 5%. That'll give you your 100%. Somatotrophs were 50%, corticotrophs 20%, gonadotrophs 5%, thyrotrophs 5%, mammatrophs 20%. But it gives you an idea of the proportion of function of these hormones coming from that little anterior, which is no bigger than the size of a pea. And half of it's going to human growth hormone for your skeleton and your muscles. And the whole gonadotrophs are only 5% for their very important function for reproduction. Sort of an interesting proportion there. We only have a few slides with this section. Coming back. I think we are losing our batteries. You see that little tiny green dot? Not very well. Do we have another pointer?
It's at the bottom of the DVD player.
I see it. Okay, I'll put this one out so you'll pick it up. So it. You want it? I'll put it here. Thank you. There we go. So our thyroid that we mentioned with the isthmus and bilobed, filled with follicles, loaded with colloid, and the colloid holds the storage form of the thyroid hormone in the form of thyroglobulin, liberates it out into the vascular system to act on cells all over the body to regulate their metabolic rate, and it's called T3 or triiodothyronine. On the posterior surface of the thyroid, we have the parathyroids, 4 of them, essential to life to regulate your calcium. Don't underestimate the role of calcium in the body. Then we had the adrenal. Can we have the next one? I think I have a few more of the thyroid, just to show. Oh, I have, this is the parathyroid acting on an osteoclast. That's a big one. That's dissolving the bone to liberate the calcium. In the next one, what are these? Sure, colloid, follicular cells. They're acted upon by the TSH from the anterior pituitary to form the storage form, the thyroglobulin. When it's liberated out into the bloodstream, then it's T3. In next slide, very active thyroid. Can't call these cuboidal cells. In the next one, what do you think this is? I'm sorry? Adrenal, did you say? You think it's adrenal? Why do you think it's adrenal? What's the adrenal look like? Does it have a medulla and a cortex? Yes. This is the adrenal. You can see the majority of it will be cortex. In the next slide. And then this will show the pituitary. This is, different names have been given over the periods of time. The pars distalis is the anterior lobe, or the adrenal hypophysis, adenohypophysis. The pars nervosa is posterior lobe because it's of neural origin coming from the floor of the diencephalon. The anterior lobe has migrated up from the roof of the mouth. Some say the nasopharynx, but it's the general region of the most superior part of your digestive system. And then you can see how rich it is in veins and arteries, carrying hormones from the hypothalamus down to act on the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. Next one. Is that all? All right, that's it. If Eva is here...